I think we're going to go ahead and get started here. It's 11:05, and so I want to certainly respect everyone's time. Thank you very much for taking time out of your day to be part of this webinar and to um, hear what we have found and how things are going. So let me start by first of all saying that this webinar will in fact be recorded. We want to make sure that we have it, and some people who aren't able to attend have asked for the information. Secondly, we will provide after the webinar a copy of the PowerPoint. We'll sort of get that all together and get it in PDF form and get it out to you as well. Certainly, because we have so many people on the call, encourage you to use the chat feature or the reactions. If you want to raise a hand, we'll try and seek out hands as we see them. And again, certainly encourage questions and inquiries. So with that, I will go to my share screen and we will have the agenda and everything for the webinar. So again, first of all, my name is Jim Reed. I'm the Executive Director for the Community College Trustees Association. And as you can see on our screen, we're going to have some remarks from Emily Goldman. Then we'll get into some of the specific research and we've been doing within phase 2 from Tim Harmon. We'll get into our frequently asked questions from Dr. Bragg and also our occupational briefs from Tim Harmon. We'll hear some perspectives from our advisory committee, which will include Dr. Salgado and also Bill Kelly, who is one of our advisory committee members, and then I'll open it up to some questions and discussions. So with that in mind, let me just first start off by saying that, when I came on board to ICCTA in 2019, one of the first things that came to my attention when my president at the time asked if I'd come up to his college and sort of take a look around and sort of show me all the great things that they were doing, and said, maybe we can start doing something around the community college baccalaureate. And I thought to myself, well, I've been lobbying for nearly 20 years. This can't be that hard a lift. So I sort of naively went back thinking that we could get this, going right away. But obviously learned rather quickly that this is an initiative that's been going on for a long time, and that if we were going to be successful on this, there needed to be sort of a different approach. So fortunately, I had the opportunity to have a conversation with a program officer at the Joyce Foundation, who sort of encouraged a slightly different approach. And so that's what sort of started this partnership with the Joyce Foundation that has now continued for a couple of years. And so with that, I really want to turn it over to Emily Goldman, who is at the Joyce Foundation and our current program officer, just to offer up a few remarks just to get us started.
Thank you, Jim. Thanks so much for having me. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. For some reason, my camera is not working, so apologize. This is my first time using this video system, so that could be why, but glad to be here in any event. And as many of you, I'm sure know, the Joyce Foundation, we invest in public policies and strategies to advance racial equity and economic mobility for the next generation in Illinois and across the Great Lakes. And as Jim mentioned, I lead the foundation's post-secondary success portfolio, which really recognizes that a post-secondary degree is still the surest path to social and economic mobility. And so we strive to eliminate barriers to college access and success. And it's in service of that goal that I think years ago, who Jim's referencing is my predecessor, Samir Gakri, decided to invest in this work, and why we continue to do so today. Evidence shows that CCBs can play an integral role in expanding access to affordable, high-quality bachelor's degrees in areas where there is high workforce demand, like IT and healthcare, advanced manufacturing, for example, and also limited access to four-year options. So CCBs expand access for students who aren't and likely never will be in the traditional four-year transfer pipeline, which I think we all know here in Illinois is a robust and important part of the higher education landscape. These are students instead who are seeking economic security for themselves and their families, but who are unlikely to pursue a four-year degree, if not in their own backyard. They're more likely to be older, taking care of children or aging family. They're more likely to be place-based or working, and in many cases are too far from a public university. These are students that Illinois cannot afford to lose, and yet under existing structures and policies, we are poised to. And we're not losing students to necessarily to other institutions or out of state, but in many cases to high cost and sometimes low value for-profit colleges, or frequently, as is the case, to nowhere. The research and the case making for CCBs is growing, and I want to thank Jim Reed, Dr. Deborah Bragg, and Tim Harmon, who you'll hear from in a bit, for helping Illinois identify those regions in the state where there's where an applied community college baccalaureate program could help local employers meet high demand workforce needs in targeted industries. And in so doing, they can improve local economies and help more students access and complete four-year degrees. So I'm excited about this work and really happy that the Joyce Foundation can be a small part of it, and look forward to engaging with you more in this conversation. So back over to you, Jim.
Great, Emily. Really, thank you so much for those words of encouragement, and certainly for all the support that you've given us as we've worked on this initiative. So with that, I want to get into a little bit about some of the work we're doing and some of the folks that have been part of it. We're really currently in phase 2 of our grant cycle with the Joyce Foundation. And as part of that, and I'll show you a timeline here in a minute, but we really thought it was important and maybe even essential to make sure that this work was not done in a silo, and that we really were reaching out and getting voices and perspectives from all the stakeholders, as many stakeholders as possible from the higher education community. And so we started out with the development of a advisory committee that started early in 2023, and you can see the names of some of the folks that were a part of that advisory committee. Dr. Baber from OCCRL, Lisa Castillo-Richmond from the Partnership for College Completion, Dr. Brian Durham from ICCB, Sarah Hartwick from the Manufacturers Association, Bill Kelly from ICCTA, he's our committee chair for Community College Baccalaureate, Ginger Ostro from the Board of Higher Education, Juan Salgado from City Colleges, and Terry Wilkerson, who was the president of the Illinois Council of Community College Presidents. I will note that we also did reach out to the representatives from the Council of Public University Presidents, and I believe that the their interest was felt like it was covered really by IBHE. I will note that as we move forward, we will be looking to expand this advisory committee because, again, we realize that this work is not done in a silo, and that we want the voices and perspectives from as many different folks as possible. Next, I'll go into a little bit of our timeline. So we've had a number of meetings, and really the meeting back in January was really just to educate and inform the committee members themselves about the Community College Baccalaureate, what's been going on in the states. We had some conversation with some of our colleges to sort of get their perspective. And it was interesting, as we sort of got further into the work, we realized that people had very different perspectives about what a community college baccalaureate was, who had the ability to authorize it, whether or not we were already doing it. So really realized that the importance of providing that structure and that foundational understanding, especially for the committee members, before we were going to go out and have those conversations with other folks. In March was really the time when we, and I say we being Tim and Deb, and again, they'll talk more about this coming up very shortly. But really looking at the labor market considerations, we were fortunate to have one of our presentations in March from a analyst up at Northern Illinois University, but really focused on a data-driven case-making model. And again, Tim will get into that here in a minute. As we got into April, was more talk around the equity questions and some of the things that Emily just mentioned, sort of looking at that perspective, and then beginning to delve a little bit more into more specific occupations that included information systems analyst, respiratory therapy, and ultimately advanced manufacturing. June, we were very fortunate to have a couple college presidents that came in. Dr. Joe S. Blondin came in from Clark State to give a presentation, and she was joined by Dr. Cynthia Spears, who's at Rhodes College in Ohio. And it was interesting to hear how they had worked from a policy perspective. Some of the things that they were doing with their curriculum were around community college baccalaureate, and in part strategically how they had worked with their governor to make that happen. So it was very interesting to hear there. And then we had our final, most recent meeting in October, where we talked about sort of the next phase, which included, as I mentioned earlier, the expansion of the advisory committee, the development of some policy options and discussions, and then also the continued education of community college baccalaureate and about those policy considerations. So with that, I am going to go to our next screen. And I will just note that as I have had conversations with our trustees, I've presented on this for most of our meetings over the past year about the work that we're doing and the support we've gotten. But it's interesting and comforting, I think, to know that we are sort of grounded and there's a foundational basis for the work we're doing. As you can see from this quote from the Truman Report back in 1947, it talks about the role of the community college in terms of providing education to youth in the community and removing both geographical and economic barriers. And if you read other parts of the report, it even goes so far as to sort of talk about that expanded role of community colleges. So we feel like we are certainly grounded in the original genesis of community colleges and some visualization that there might be an expanded role for them. So with that, I am going to turn it over to our researchers. And actually, before I do that, I do want to brag a little, no pun intended, on our researchers, because I feel like I have been incredibly blessed and fortunate to work with just amazing researchers. And so I do want to just let you know about Deb and Tim and how much they really bring to this conversation and how fortunate we are to have them. Deb Bragg is president of Bragg & Associates, which is an equity-minded consulting group dedicated to advancing student success in education and employment. During her career, Dr. Bragg has founded 2 community college research centers, the Community College Research Initiative at the University of Washington in Seattle, and the Office of Community College Research and Leadership at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. Her research focuses on transitions to and through education to employment, which is an important part of this work we're doing. She has led national studies on a wide range of P20 education policies, including developmental education, career technical education, career pathways, transfer, and community college baccalaureates. She received her bachelor's in secondary teaching from the University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana, master's and PhD from the Ohio State University with specializations in post-secondary and adult ed. And partnering with her and also working with us is Tim Harmon, who is the president of Workforce Enterprise Services, which is a consulting firm that was formed in 2003 with a focus on post-secondary education and workforce program improvement. WES has served national, state, and local clients, including the federal government, national advocacy organizations, several state education and workforce agencies, and multiple local workforce organizations and community colleges. Tim earned his bachelor's degree from Olivet Nazarene University and his master's in public administration from the University of Illinois Springfield. So with that, I will turn it over to Tim Harmon.
Thank you so much, Jim. And let me say how much we appreciate our partnership with you and our work together on this important initiative. And it has been a privilege also for me to work with Dr. Bragg. I have learned more than I could possibly explain to you about how post-secondary education works in the United States, as well as Illinois, of course. And so it has been a real treat to have this opportunity to, bring my workforce perspective to bear on this work. I think it's important work, and I'm excited to be involved in it. And what we would like to do for you this morning is to kind of give you first an overview of the overall kind of what we tried to accomplish with our research during phase 2. And we are very grateful, I should say at the outset, for the support of the Joyce Foundation throughout this work, and not just in this work in Illinois, but also in our work with other Great Lakes states, as Deborah will perhaps mention in more detail. We have been privileged to be involved with the foundation on this work and with other foundations that have supported the work of the Community College Baccalaureate Association and our research as around this work across the United States. So this has been a great privilege of mine, and we really want you all to know how much we appreciate your attention and your ability to be part of this webinar today. We would encourage you, before I get into that, if you have questions, please use your chat feature to record those. We will try at the end of this to reserve some time to get to as many of those as we can. And if we can't get to them in our session this morning, we'll get to them later, because we want to encourage a dialogue. We see this as sort of kicking off a kind of public dialogue discussion with stakeholders throughout the state. And so we're excited to kind of get started with that and grow out past this fantastic advisory committee that we've had to work with to include a broader group of folks that are involved in this. And we're thrilled to see the number of people that are here today. But so before I jump in, let me just say that from the very beginning, going back into phase 1 of our work, we always have been animated by sort of 2 key ideas around why you would want to have a community college confer a baccalaureate degree. Now, so we've been referring to this as the case-making process or the case-making methodology. And that, by the way, is a case that's still needs to be made in Illinois, but it's a case that's been made in about half the states in the United States. So we'll talk more about that in a minute, but we see there being 2 main ideas around why a community college would want to be able to confer a baccalaureate degree. The first is that they could use those degrees to help address substantial workforce needs, including high demand, well-paid occupations in key sectors of the economy in the state. And secondly, and equally importantly, CCB degrees can be used to provide equitable access to baccalaureate completion for students who would not otherwise be likely to attain the degree. And we can talk more about what that entails, but we've alluded to some of those components already around geographic access, financial access, programmatic access, et cetera. And so we see the CCB degree as playing a key role potentially in our ability to address both of these fundamental dimensions. And so we think that both should be addressed, and the strongest case would occur in cases where both things were being satisfied. So just with that as kind of background and sort of where we're coming from, if we could take a look at the next slide. And also, I would remind folks, make sure you're muted so that we're not getting the background. Still not seeing the next slide, Jim. Oh, thank you. So during our phase 2 research, here are some of the high points of what we took on. We started with continued development of the case-making methodology, including a supply and demand analysis and equity analysis. And you'll see some of the results of that in our discussion this morning. We also completed the 20 frequently asked questions about community college baccalaureate degrees in Illinois. And that is a document that was prepared by Deborah Bragg, and that is available on the ICCTA website. And I encourage you all to take a look at that. I'm not going to say it's everything you ever wanted to know about community college baccalaureate degrees, but it's sneaking up on that. So I'll brag on her a little bit about that, but she's going to walk you through some of the highlights of that. We can't go through all 20 questions maybe, but we're going to hit some of the key ones. And then we completed 3 CCB occupational briefs, which I'm going to be highlighting in a little bit. As Jim mentioned, information security analyst, respiratory therapist, and advanced manufacturing. And then finally, and I suppose maybe most importantly, we spent a fair amount of time consulting with stakeholders via the advisory committee, as Jim has mentioned. And that conversation and those meetings, I think, were very critical to guiding our research work and helping us clarify our own thinking as researchers around this and identifying issues that we knew would need to be addressed and helping us to begin thinking about what some of the components of a CCB policy might look like in Illinois going forward. So that's kind of where we sort of what we tried to get done in phase 2. We think we've accomplished that, but we wanted to switch now to Dr. Bragg and give Deborah a chance to give us the highlights from the frequently asked questions document.
Well, thank you, Tim and Jim. I just want to echo what a pleasure it's been to work with this group, and my thanks to the Joyce Foundation and Emily Goldman for all of her support. I'm going to do this relatively quickly, but I do have some perspectives I'd like to share with you. I began researching baccalaureates offered by community colleges and applied baccalaureates offered by universities actually back in 2007. So I've been studying these degrees nationwide and also internationally for a long time. And that could take a lot of time, but I'll try to just hit the highlights here today. And as Tim said, the FAQ is much more detailed than what we'll be able to share. So we can go to the next slide. So in the FAQ, here is the link. If you go to the ICCTA website, it's under the header of education, and the community college baccalaureates are the very first entry there. And if you click that and scroll down, you'll see the FAQ is linked there. What we talk about, and I appreciate my support from Tim Harmon, who is part of this, the creation of this document. We do talk about national trends. I also mention international trends. The United States is not even leading this work. This is happening internationally. So it's a much bigger movement than we even know about here in the United States. But I'll tell you a little bit about what we know about that. In the FAQ, there are sections that talk about the factors that influence the adoption of these degrees. We talk a little bit about the concerns that are raised by the higher education sectors and what we know about those concerns and how they're being resolved or not across the states. We talk about who these students are, and I'll share what we know about that a little bit here and about the graduates. We report the research we've done and others have done on access and outcomes that relate to college completion as well as employment and wage increases, and that body of research is growing. We talk about what we know about program design and implementation and why program design is so critical to meet the needs of the students in these programs. And then we kind of end with a relatively short but important section on what are the lessons for Illinois. And woven through the FAQ are discussions of how these issues relate to our own state of Illinois. So I do encourage you to take a look at the FAQ. There's much, much more than we'll talk about today. But if we could advance this slide. I'm gonna just, Tim mentioned 24 states now have community colleges that confer bachelor's degrees or approved to confer bachelor's degrees. I do want to say there are more states in which two-year campuses of universities confer both associates and bachelor's degrees. So if we looked at everything, we would have some color on almost every state on this map. But being very true to what we define as a community college baccalaureate institution, that's an institution that has the associate degree and those sub-baccalaureate degrees are the predominant degrees that are conferred by the institution. They add to that mix a bachelor's degree. But they continue to emphasize the community college's mission, the commitment to open access, the commitment to reaching their regional constituents. All of those things continue in the institutions that we'll be talking about today as CCB conferring institutions. And I do want to say that some state laws do say these institutions must continue to be associate dominant institutions. So that is a part of not only the legislation, but the commitment that these institutions are making. You can see we do have some Great Lakes state neighbors that do confer bachelor's degrees. So Michigan, Indiana, Ohio, and Missouri are all conferring these degrees. Ohio and Missouri are relatively new on the list, and Ohio is scaling up very rapidly. 14 of their 23 community colleges are now approved or conferring a bachelor's degree. So lots of growth. So I'm going to show that to you on the next slide. So this slide shows you how these institutions have been growing since 1989, which is the first, recognized as the first state to change state law to authorize what were two-year branch campuses of the University of West Virginia. And those institutions continue to be recognized as the first in the country. As you can see, it's a long time, 34 years since this started. So when we talk about it being new in Illinois, it's new to Illinois, but it's not new to much of the country. There's a few states I want to point out along here. Arizona is the most recent state to adopt in 2021. And that state is also rapidly scaling up. But other very major states with large community college systems are on this slide. California has adopted baccalaureate degrees, is rapidly scaling up. Texas, Florida, as I said, Ohio, Colorado. I could go on. And you saw the map, but this is growing nationally. And the states that I'll talk and we've studied mostly are Florida and Washington, and that's because those two states have the most students and they also have the best data. So that's where we've learned a lot about these degrees. And hopefully someday Illinois will be on this map. That's my hope. Next slide, please. So I wanted to share with you what these programs are. We are actively engaged in working with the Community College Baccalaureate Association, which is a national group that works with institutions that are associate granting community colleges, predominantly that award baccalaureates. So we now track all of the programs that are being offered nationwide. And you'll notice on this slide, 2 years ago, we created the first inventory. There are about 560 programs. Today, there are about 700 programs. In only the last 2 years, we have grown by about 140 programs. So we can see here what these programs are. The largest area, and has been historically, are programs related to business. And those programs are often customized for people who are working learners, people who have spent some time in the labor force, and they have an opportunity for promotion. And these programs bring together often folks who've graduated from a community college, they've been out working for 10, 15 years. Their employers are seeking an opportunity to advance these employees, and they'd like for them to have a bachelor's degree. And the community colleges develop a program that really focus on supervision, organizational leadership, management, that brings together groups of students who completed a technical degree at a community college and advances their careers. That is historically kind of the roots of these programs, but those programs do continue. I would point out, though, if you look at the next 4 program areas, health professions, education, nursing, and computer and information sciences, those are the program areas that are growing the most over the last 2 years. So we do see tremendous growth in those areas, and including areas like teaching and nursing, where we have documented shortages across this country and frankly in this state of Illinois. The other thing I think is important to know is about half of these degrees are Bachelors of Applied Science degrees, BAS, or Bachelors of Applied Technology or Bachelors of Technology. There's a lot of permutations of that. About half of these degrees are of that degree type. The BSN is another type of degree that's conferred. And then the remaining degrees are typically Bachelor of Science degrees. I do want to say that we should not assume that every state structures its college credentials the way we do in the state of Illinois. So some of what we see in terms of which degrees are adopted has more to do with state history on how higher education structures credentials than it does on maybe assumptions we might make about which programs are a BAS or a BS. So there's a longer discussion we could have, and we have had in our advisory group, but please know that most, if not all of these programs are applied and technical programs. We do not see very many Bachelor of Arts anywhere in the country. There are a few, but those are not the degrees we're talking about here. So we can go to the next slide. Who are the students? We've done deeper research, as I said, in Florida and Washington. We found very common characteristics of students who are enrolled and completing CCB programs. These are older students, they're working learners, and like students who are in career and technical education programs, which is where most of these students are enrolled when they're at that first and second year of college. They're in an Associate Applied Arts program. And if you look at those students in the state of Illinois, you will also find our students in Illinois in CTE certificate and associate programs are much like the students on this list. They're students who are older than traditional age. They're more racially and ethnically diverse than the students we see in our universities or even in our transfer programs. They tend to be first generation college. They are working learners. They have dependents, children and family they are caring for. And I like to say it's not necessarily that they're place bound, although we can use that term. In our interviews of students, what we find is they are rooted and tied to their communities in a deep and steadfast way. It is their intention to get their degree, stay in their community, and help grow the strength of their economy and of their communities. And so that's a critically important understanding of who these students are. And then finally, while students are working, we found in Washington a higher proportion of our CCB students are Pell recipients So they're working a lot of hours, but the income is not lifting them out of that Pell eligible category. And so that is why these students need to pursue a bachelor's degree. And I'll say a little bit more about students as we go ahead. So we can go to the next slide. I also want to say something about geography. I'm very proud of the higher education system in Illinois, as I know all of you are. There's many parts of our system that we can and should be proud of. One of the things that came as a surprise to me was we conducted analysis to identify education deserts in the state of Illinois, and I'm not aware that anyone has done this analysis. We talked to Nick Hillman, who's an expert and really the author, originator of Education Deserts, who's at the University of Wisconsin, and he helped kind of hold our hand through how to do this analysis. And one of the things we found is, guess what? We have education deserts in the state of Illinois, and some of the students we're talking about live in these deserts. And our preliminary analysis shows these are students who are not likely to transfer. They're not likely to ever get a bachelor's degree. And part of that is proximity. It's about geography. So we use the Hillman's definition of using commuting zones. Now, what this means is we have 102 counties in the state of Illinois, and the federal government, who creates this definition of commuting zones, says we have 25. So that means there's around 4 counties in each of these commuting zones, and the maps across the state. In 4 of these commuting zones, we have no public higher education, no community colleges, no public universities. That is clearly an education desert, according to Hillman. But we actually have 8 more commuting zones where there is no public university or no public university within 50 miles of the community college. That too qualifies as an education desert. That's about half of the state. Has a geography that makes it very difficult for these students to commute to get a bachelor's degree. And by the way, this does extend to students who are online. Even online students prefer proximity to the baccalaureate conferring institution to provide support for their education. So it's not an issue that doesn't exist. It does exist in Illinois. And in fact, 5 more of our commuting zones do have a community college, no public university, but we do have a public university within 50 miles. So we do not consider that an education desert, but there is less accessibility. And then finally, we have 8 of our commuting zones that do have a public university, and the most predominant region is Cook County and up in Illinois, although even there we have challenges with geography for some of our students. So I just want to, when we're talking about why are we talking about this, access to higher education is critically important, and we have not solved that problem for all of our students. And the community college baccalaureate degree really says, let's face this, let's deal with this in a way that we can provide baccalaureate access. And then let's go to the next slide. I also want to talk just a little bit about money. I found this this slide as part of an FAQ on the Illinois Community College Board website. So what we see here are real differences in tuition according to our sectors. And what we know based on our research is most community college baccalaureate degrees in the country are either offered at the same tuition rate as the associate degree program. So in our state, around $4,000 versus almost $15,000 for public universities. Or they may raise that to 150% of that lower division when the student gets to the upper division. We do not find many states where the tuition equals the public universities, but we do have some states where that does happen. So those decisions are made by states, but the fact that these degrees are affordable is extremely important when we talk to the students who are enrolling in these programs. And then I just want to make one last comment about transfer, because, and I want to show the next slide then to wind down here. Lots of comparisons are made between these community college baccalaureate programs and transfer programs. When I was in Washington, we did the analysis and we looked at the completion of the students who were in their baccalaureate, community college baccalaureate programs and the university transfer graduation rates. We found them to be very similar completion rates. But the point I want to make to you is these are not the same groups of students. The 68% who are completing in the bachelor's programs are all Bachelor of Applied Science students who completed an applied associate degree that was not part of the direct transfer agreement. These are students who would have never been served. They would have never been able to transfer without credit loss. So they are an addition to the transfer students in Washington. And frankly, Washington has, like Illinois, has one of the most robust transfer systems in the country. Offering the BAS programs in the community college has not weakened transfer, it has strengthened transfer. And these coexist to grow baccalaureate attainment in this state and others where the baccalaureates are awarded. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to my colleague, Tim Harmon.
Thank you. Thank you, Deb.
Thanks, Deb. I really appreciate that presentation. And I, again, would encourage you all to go to the website and, download the full document, and you will come away from that experience knowing a lot more than you do now about community college baccalaureates, I can guarantee it. So, Jim, if we could slip to the next slide, then I'd like to spend a few minutes here and apologize in advance for kind of giving you a bit of a drink from the fire hose, as we say. But we're gonna show some data here. Got to have data. Can't do without data. So we're going to show some data. We're going to move through some slides fairly quickly here. And again, I would encourage you to go out to the website and look at these briefs to get the more detailed version. But I wanted to give you a taste of what we found out when we did our supply and demand analysis. So I want to start with a little discussion about what we did and why we did it, what data we use, that sort of thing, so we can just be transparent about how we approached it. And then we'll go through the various briefs and the results. So we had a handful of questions that we were trying to tackle with this work. And the first is, what occupation should we even look at for this? And what related programs of study should we be including in that? So we have to look at both occupations and the programs of study that respond to those, prepare people to enter those occupations, right? So we selected 3 occupations or occupational areas to use as examples for illustrating the potential for CCB development. And when we did that, we looked at some things like, some criteria. We were looking for occupations with strong demand, that had good wages, that had demand for bachelor's degrees, right? And that there was applied focus for program development, as Deborah said. And then we also looked at, what was going on in other states. There's a lot of other states out there, as you've heard, that are doing this, and we have access to the inventory of all those programs. And so we looked at that as well to see, what are people doing out there in the other parts of the country? And then do we have associate degree programs in Illinois that could potentially feed into that? So those are some of the criteria that we use. And it's not a precise science, but these are sort of the rules of thumb that we used when we were trying to decide which occupations should we look at. And there's a lot that we could. We picked the ones that you're seeing here today. The second question is what about geography? We know that regions and regional differences are extremely important, and this has been mentioned once or twice already this morning. But what regions should you use? Well, we used the state's 10 official economic development regions. But you could use other regions could be used, like community college districts or state higher education planning districts or commuting zones or even a statewide view. What you're seeing today is just going to be statewide data. The briefs have the 10 regions broken out, but that's too much of a blizzard of data to go through here today. But you can get that stuff. But with the tools that we had available to us, we have the option of looking at different regional configurations. But that's what we settled on, was the official state regions. Now, so the next question would be: is there substantial? We go back. If there's substantial current and projected demand for workers in the occupation, and for that, we use the Bureau of Labor Statistics, Occupational Employment Statistics projections of vacancies due to growth and replacements, and the Lightcast job posting analytics, which measures online job openings regardless of the reason for the opening. So just maybe mention, this is the first time I use the word Lightcast. Let me just mention that we were fortunate to be able to subscribe to the Lightcast data analytics package. It allows us to both seamlessly get to all these official sources of BLS and census and IPEDS data. It makes it simpler to get to those, but it also allows us to access the data that Lightcast aggregates every day from every online job opening posted in the United States or the Western world, and so we can look at those, and they turn that into data, and it allows us to know a lot of things about what employers are saying right now about what they need. So we'll allude to that. But then when I talk about job placement analytics, that's kind of what I'm referring to. So finally, can workers expect what kind of money can they get from these jobs? And that's an important part of demand. So we use the BLS median earnings data, and then the job placement analytics advertise median salary data, because employers, not always, but many times, put the potential salary in the job posting, and Lightcast uses that to create median salary data. Sometimes those are very similar, sometimes they're very different. So you'll see that in a second. All right, sorry, next slide, Jim. And so the next question is so we got demand, that's great. It's great to have demand, it's great to have wages, but what about demand for baccalaureates, for graduates who have a baccalaureate degree? Because not necessarily all demand consists of baccalaureate demand, right? So we need to sort of see what component of that is baccalaureate. So for that, we looked at the Lightcast JPA report to determine the minimum and preferred employer educational requirements, because employers have the option when they post a job opening to say what sort of educational level they're looking for, and many do. And so we use that data. And then, is there sufficient supply of graduates to meet the current and projected needs? So now we switch to the supply side and use the IPEDS data and for the related, CIP or classification of structural program categories to kind of get a sense of what's going on with that. And we compare those measures of demand to arrive at an overall assessment of supply and demand balance between what's going on the demand side and what's going on the supply side. And then we have a couple other questions. What are the skill requirements? So the Lightcast job placement analytics report allows us to look at skill requirements. And so they categorize those into, on specialized, general, software skills. So we look at the most frequently mentioned skills in those aggregated analytics to see what's interesting about that in terms of skill requirements. And then finally, how do student demographics compare across sectors? And our community college's position to contribute to improvement in equitable access and completion. So for there, we use the IBHE graduate characteristics data by CIP code to compute the percentage of graduates in each of the top institutions by gender and race ethnicity to give us a sense of what's going on in those institutions relative to sort of what's happening in the whole state for all programs in that category. At least allows us to get a sense of which institutions seem to be doing a better job of serving a more diverse population. So that was a component of our work as well. Okay, sorry, Jim, next slide. All right, so now let's drill into some of these results if we could for a few minutes. So I'm going to take a minute on this slide because it's the first one, and it's kind of we're going to walk through that because we're going to be using a slide that looks like this on each of the occupational areas. So these figure one is the key supply and demand indicators for information security analysis, which is our first occupation. So these 4 bars that you're looking at correspond to 4 metrics that we examined. First bar is the number of graduates from the related program of study, which is information system security in this case. And it's across all graduates, regardless of credential, in other words, everybody. The second bar is the BLS projected annual vacancies. That's the number of vacancies due to growth and replacement of those permanently leaving the occupation. We kind of consider that as sort of a floor, frankly, on demand, because the BLS projections are designed to all cross-foot and balance, and they're fairly conservative, frankly. And they don't always pick up on shifts across occupational categories, but it's sort of the floor. So we look at it that way. The third bar is the count of persons currently employed in the occupation, again, according to BLS. And the last bar is the number of unduplicated online job openings on an annual basis for the occupation from the Lightcast online job postings data that I mentioned. So that includes all the vacancies, including turnover, regardless of the reason, right? So obviously, you look at, there's a lot of demand for information security analysts in Illinois. And it's also surprising to me to see that online vacancies on an annual basis were greater than the BLS estimate of total employment in the occupation. So to me, that's an indicator of how information system security roles are shifting, to this job title. So in other words, rather than just, software engineers or software developers or network security or network administrators, employers are looking for people that have specific information security skills. And that's reflected in these job openings. Next slide. So another measure of demand is how much you're going to make if you do this. And we're looking for ones where you make good money. And so in this case, to look at this, we had two sources. We have the BLS wage and salary survey data, which is the first bar, and then the Lightcast advertised salary data from the online job posting. Now, in this case, they're very similar and they're very good. So information security analysts in Illinois can expect to earn nearly $120,000 per year. That's the median. That's not going to be the starting probably, but that's your median value for that. So pretty good job. Next slide. Okay, so we have a lot of demand. Obviously, we have a good job that makes good money, but what about baccalaureates? How many of these roles need baccalaureates? So that's what this figure is. So in other words, we need to identify or at least come up with a way of estimating the proportion of the demand that's really for bachelor's degree folks, as opposed to any degree or no degree. So to do that, we use the Lightcast online job openings data to look at what employers are seeking vis-a-vis education level. And so this particular chart is focused on what employers said were the minimum requirements, and they're mostly bachelor's or above for this occupation. As you can see, about 60% or so at bachelor's or above, although some employers, 27%, didn't include a requirement for an educational requirement in their job opening. So they were saying, well, I don't care about your degree. I just want you to be able to do X, Y, and Z. Here's my skills. So employers don't always say what they want, but many do. And in this case, most did. Next slide. Okay, so we have strong demand, good wages, a lot of bachelors needed. What about the supply? What are we doing on the supply side to respond to all this great stuff? Are we producing enough graduates to fill these openings? Well, it's kind of a good news, bad news situation here. The good news is that we are producing a lot more of these persons, these graduates, than we used to. I mean, it's really doubled from 2016 to 2021, which is the most recent data I had when I did that chart. The bad news is it's not nearly enough, not even close to what employers are saying they need right now. So we got a good mix of graduates too across different types of credentials. One of the things that was interesting to me about what's going on here is that there are programs across the range here from certificates, short-term certificates, all the way up through master's degrees around information system security. So it's a very popular field, but it's not as popular as employers would like to see, I think, is sort of the bottom line on this. Next slide. Okay, so now we want to switch to our second occupation, which was respiratory therapist. And that's a very different picture here, but it's similar in this regard. We see a similar pattern, if you will, in terms of the demand versus the supply. So a relatively small number of respiratory therapy graduates, only 163 in 21 versus 355 BLS annual vacancies and 2,800 online unduplicated job postings. So a huge difference between, BLS and the online data here. And actually our online vacancies, although not like information system security, where there was more of those than there were people in the job right now, at least it's, it's about half. It's a pretty good chunk of the total employment in this occupation are current vacancies, if you will. So a similar pattern, maybe not quite as strong as the information security analyst, but still pretty darn strong. All right, and then next slide. Okay, so what about earnings? So and it's an interesting picture here too, while the BLS earnings data has this occupation at around $66,000 a year, which is pretty solid. When we look at the Lightcast advertised salary median, it's much higher, 93. So to me, that's another indication that we have strong competition by employers for available talent, right? That would be sort of, you're looking for like, the canary in the coal mine kind of indicator of mismatch between supply and demand. These escalating wages and current job openings would be a pretty good indicator of that to me. Next slide. Okay, so what about bachelor's degree demand though? So this is a more nuanced picture, and I think we'll take a minute to walk through this. So most employers, as it turns out, don't specify an educational requirement for this occupation. Nearly 60% don't say, they're not specifying one. That's possibly, and I didn't talk to the employer, so I'm speculating a little bit here, but it's possibly because this is a licensed occupation. And to be a respiratory therapist in Illinois, and frankly, most states, you have to have at least an associate's degree just to enter the occupation, because it's licensed occupation. So, if you're an employer and you need someone with an associate degree, you don't need to ask for it in your job opening, because as long as you say, I need you to be a registered or a certified respiratory therapist, you will have covered that. So it's not necessary really to say it, and most didn't. But among those that did talk about education, where they had like a range, like a low and a high, or a minimum and a preferred, a lot of those did express a preference for a bachelor's degree. About a little over a third of them expressed a preference for a bachelor's degree. So to me, it indicates at least there's an interest and a preference on the part of many employers for respiratory therapists to hold a bachelor's degree. Next slide. Okay. So this is the supply side on this, and just take a minute, because there's a little bit of a story here. So in part from employer preferences, which we talked about in the prior slide, what will ultimately determine or ultimately drive requirements for this occupation are the national accreditation requirements for respiratory therapist programs, along with state licensing agency policy. The educational requirements for entering into this occupation are in transition, I think is the fairest thing to say. And so a little bit of background on this. The American Association for Respiratory Care, or AARC, is the primary professional membership organization for respiratory therapists and allied health professionals. And since 2010, they, in their conferences and related research, have supported the baccalaureate degree as the minimum educational requirement for new entrants into the profession. Now, the Commission on Accreditation of Respiratory Care, or COARC, that's the body that accredits respiratory care instructional programs throughout the United States. Now, COARC has indicated they will be undertaking a comprehensive revision of the accreditation standards for entry into professional respiratory care practice. I know that's a large moniker there, but that's what they call it. And they're doing that, and that's going to be adopted in 2025. So we expect a transition to bachelor's preparation for this occupation for new entrants in the next few years. However, when you look at these data, we see that we're not, in Illinois at least, we are not preparing any bachelor's graduates in this program at all, not one. And also, the associate degree program outcomes have been declining as well. So this is an area where we feel like sort of, heading toward a bit of a problem down the road, because if we see professional requirements for entry to shifting, and we're not going to be ready to respond to it unless we start thinking now about what to do about that. Okay, so that's kind of the bottom line on RT. Jen, next slide. And before I proceed, I'll say, please put your questions in the chat. We were going to make every attempt to get to those at the end. And I know I've already seen a couple good questions along the way, so I appreciate your help with that. So finally, advanced manufacturing. Okay, so this is quite different from the other two occupations that we looked at. Advanced manufacturing, refers to a set of functions and technologies rather than a specific occupation. So advanced manufacturing includes production activities that depend on information, automation, computation, software sensing, networking. Some examples of the technologies used in advanced manufacturing include additive manufacturing, advanced composite materials, robotics, automation, laser machining, welding, nanotechnology, and network IT integration in the manufacturing process. So for this reason, was necessary for us to define which occupations and which related programs of study should be included in our analysis of the potential for CCB degree development. Now, by the way, I should mention that looking at advanced manufacturing itself was an idea that came out of our work with the advisory committee, who said, this is an area of emphasis for the state of Illinois. As part of its overall economic development strategy, it's made significant investment in advanced manufacturing programs at the state and local level across the state. And so, we should be looking at this as a potential area for CCB development. And that's really kind of what's driving this. But to figure out which occupations we should include in this mix, we examine Lightcast employment projections and job postings information for numerous occupations, focusing on industrial production management and engineering technology, those two main categories. And we use the following criteria to help us select the occupations that would have the greatest potential for CCB development. We look, does the occupation have substantial employment in Illinois and reasonable projected job vacancies? Is there substantial current demand for employment as reflected in Lightcast online job openings? So we got good BLS projections and good openings. And then is there adequate demand for baccalaureate prepared employees in the occupation? Because not all of these necessarily require baccalaureate. Not all potential occupations in this field, as it will, but many of them do. And those are the ones you're looking at. And what are the potential earnings? So we wanted to kind of, check those boxes on each of those, or at least have a group that, together was good for that. So we have our occupations, you see those there. What about the related programs of study? So based on our review of existing IPEDS data, along with the ICCB manufacturing program data, which they shared with us, and the SOC-SIP crosswalk that we could access through Lightcast, and as well as our look at CCB programs offered in other states, we've selected the CCB codes that seem to make most closely related to the occupations of interest. So for industrial production managers, that includes engineering, industrial management, and operations management and supervision. And for the engineering technicians and technologists, the 9 CIP codes that you see there. And this table is will be in the brief. Oh, and so let me just mention on the briefs, 2 of the 3 briefs are on the website now. This one that we're talking about right now is not there yet, not quite there. We're still doing some edits on that, but we hope to have that brief available soon. So armed with all that background discussion, I apologize for the drilling into that too deeply maybe, but I think it's important to understand where we're coming from, because it's a different kind of a critter than the other occupations we looked at. So what did we learn? So we learned that the number of job vacancies posted by employers, many times the number of graduates across all credential types on an annual basis for both occupations. Now, if we compare it to the BLS annual vacancies, the more conservative sort of the floor, it's a little bit more mixed. It looks good. It looks very good for industrial production managers. And it's a little bit more, I would say it's more in balance for the engineering technologists and technicians category. But again, pretty good demand for both occupations on both sides. Next slide. what about demand for baccalaureates? We have total demand, but now we got to look at demand for baccalaureates. So for 63.4% of job postings for industrial production managers had a minimum educational requirement of a BA or above. And 97%, basically all of them, had a range of educational preferences. In other words, if they had, yes, I'd like it to be this, but it would be better if it was this, that they were looking for BAs or above. So really, in terms of preferred educational level for industrial production managers, universally baccalaureate, really. And then for engineering technicians, a little bit more nuanced situation there. The corresponding values are 16% and 63.4. So if we look at the minimum requirement, it's not as high. But if we look at sort of like my preferred maximum level, it's 2/3 or so. So I think pretty good indication of preference for baccalaureate in both categories, but especially in industrial production managers. Next slide. What about earnings? This I thought was another interesting way of looking at the earnings data that gave us some sense of demand for baccalaureates. So we see a real wage bump in both categories for employees with a baccalaureate versus those. In other words, where the employer is saying, I want a baccalaureate for this, and here's my advertised wage. It's $100,000 for production managers, and when they're not saying they want a baccalaureate, it's $85,000. So $15,000 bump in employers' willingness to pay, if you will, and similar numbers for a lower, of course, but similar numbers on the engineering technicians, about 60 grand for those where they don't request a baccalaureate and about 72 for ones where they do. So that to me, that seems to me, again, as we talked about with respiratory therapists, it's an indication that there's a preference there for the baccalaureate prepared student. All right, next slide, next and last slide, I think. So despite strong demand for industrial production managers, the trend in graduates in this program have been down really across all credential categories, if you will. So that's a bit of a concern, and we're sort of kind of heading in the wrong direction there. And then next slide. For engineering technician programs, the nine CIP codes that we swept up for that, it's a little bit more of a mixed situation. Those the number of Illinois graduates in these programs increased from 2016 to 2018, and then declined somewhat to 20, dropped during the pandemic, of course, and then it's partially recovered at least to 22. But over the course of that whole period, it's gone up some, but not dramatically. So we're kind of holding our own on those. And you see that mix of credentials has remained pretty similar over the years as well. So that kind of gives you a sense of what we learned from this. Again, hope we can answer any questions that you have and encourage you to look at these briefs. And then there's a lot more deeper dive, and there's a lot more data in the briefs that we didn't talk about today. Although it seems like I'm sure we talked about everything. So I'd like to, Jim, you may turn this back over to you now to introduce Dr. Salgado.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you very much, Tim. Thanks for the detail. I know, like you said, was probably felt to some folks like we were drinking from the fire hose, but
Right.
I'm sure there'll be lots of questions and hopefully them will be answered. At this time, would really welcome a couple of our advisory committee members that I believe are on. Chancellor Salgado, I don't know if Bill Kelly is still on or not, and or Dr. Durham, but really just to offer some thoughts, sort of comments in terms of their role as a member of the advisory committee and just the work that's begun, because like I mentioned earlier, we will be looking to hopefully expand that advisory committee to other interests and other thoughts. So Chancellor, and
yeah,
there we go. Okay.
I'm on, Jim. Good to see you all virtually here. First, I just want to share appreciation to, you, Jim, to the ICCTA, for this tremendous leadership that you've taken, and really, taking a data-driven approach, understanding that, that we do need to have a great deal of information to make sure that, we're approaching the work in the right way. And so it's been a really great experience to, be side by side, to have Deborah's, experience from the field all across the country, and so I guess what I would have to say, is, when you have the mix, if you look at, the information that's been shared with us, you have an economic development imperative. Anytime there are, uh, well-paying jobs that are going unfilled, right? That's a major loss to the economy, regional economy, but also, local economies. And it's a major impediment to those institutions, that are not being able to benefit from that workforce. It could impact their growth. It definitely is impacting their bottom lines. That impacts their ability to further invest. And at the same time, people are going without those occupations. And so it feels like in a couple of really important areas, there is this huge economic development imperative that, we need to meet, and we need to meet sooner rather than later. The second thing that's clear to me is that there's a community development imperative here, that there, as Deborah was talking about, there are localities, that are deserts. And even where there aren't deserts, like in Chicago, there are serious access challenges that students face. And we're talking about a very diverse set of students, not just racially, and ethnically, but diverse in terms of their education journeys and their, abilities to, access the current infrastructure that exists, even when it exists in those localities. And so, it seems to me we can't afford to not have a all-in approach. How do you make sure that you're actually reaching the totality of the potential future workforce that is available to us? And we know right now, with the shortage in labor force, that is not just a short-term challenge. This is a medium to long-term, opportunity, if you will, for us to, tap into new talent, or talent that's been right there all along, that we just have to find a better way of tapping into. So there's a huge community development imperative. Those communities, that aren't being, fully represented or fully tapped into in the existing ways of doing the work, will now have the potential, as a result of us having more access points. And, there's a student experience imperative that's really clear here, right? When you're, what our students, are looking for is the opportunity, and high quality opportunities. And, we all know too that transition points are challenging, and some of those students don't make it through those, transition points necessarily. And so, again, there's a student experience imperative. I just say that the one thing, too, that is, really is a constant reminder, this is not a zero-sum game. It's really clear, that, the CCV would be absolutely additive in every way, and not duplicative. And so that's, something that, we just need to continue to, keep in our mind. And so it's, I'll just leave with this reflection, Jim. It's that, given that there's an economic imperative, development imperative, community development, and student experience imperative, I don't see what the imperative is to not doing CCB in a focused way. I was trying to find like the right, like what, and that's what, try to figure out, because from my standpoint, it's an all solutions, approach. When you have these, mismatches between, what we need in the marketplace and what we currently have. And student choice certainly should be driven. The more choices that students have, the better off they're going to be. And so, I'm trying to figure out what imperative would hold us back from actually moving in this direction, right? What is that force that is saying to us, oh, absolutely not, we shouldn't do this? And why, given that the evidence that you all have shared, points to so many beneficiaries, right, of this kind of an effort.
Great. Thank you very much, Chancellor. Appreciate it. We also have Dr. David Sam, who's the president at Elgin Community College, who is also a member of the advisory committee. His name wasn't listed because of the time. He was not the president of the council. It was President Terry Wilkerson, but Dr. Sam is the current president, has transitioned on. And so we've asked him if he would make a few reflections as well.
Thank you very much. Obviously, very compelling. At the last meeting, I indicated my willingness to liaise with the convener of the University President's Council to, even though we have an indication of how they feel, to test and see. And in the meantime, it's moved from the president of NIU, Dr. Freeman, to the president of Chicago State. But because I have a good relationship with the president of NIU, I decided still to go there and talk to her. And I did. I was able to meet with her yesterday. And I wasn't surprised by the response. Still strongly opposed. In fact, she said that the University President's Council is very disappointed that this is being pushed. And then she modified it and indicated that they are more than disappointed by all of this. And they were hoping that we'll continue to work with them to solve any desert issues that are there and any related issues. And in the conversation, which was more than cordial, I threw out some like welding. You have, for someone to have the full education of welding of today and tomorrow, you need to exceed the 60 hours and so forth. And she said, hey, for many of these career programs, the universities would like to do 3+1. So that the issues that we are raising could be addressed. And so my general understanding, view of it is that they simply would not like to see our noses in the tent. That is the bottom line. And it wasn't anything that we didn't know, but I just wanted to hear it directly from someone that I have very good relationship with. And we spend considerable time on bilateral relationship and things that we are going to do. And that was very fruitful. But since I promised I was going to do it, I wanted to be sure that I report back that it's nothing new. They are going to fight it strongly. That is what they plan to do. Fight it strongly every step of the way.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Sam. Any other advisory committee members on the call? I don't know if I see any others.
I'll just briefly, Jim.
There you go. Yeah, please.
I'll just chime in. I'm just incredibly appreciative and impressed with Deborah's and Tim's data-driven analysis. I've always understood that with the access and equity and workforce development, community development, economic development were the core reasons, the compelling reasons to drive the community college baccalaureate. But to have the data one, the overwhelming need for it, and two, that these are students who to me it dispels myths. These are students who would not necessarily be going to the 4-year public or private 4-year public university. They're as Deborah mentioned, they're rooted in their community, or place bound, as I used to call it. But and either for economic reasons, because they have parents and children that they're taking care of, their the commuting issues, transportation issues. They need, if they're going to further their education and their ability to earn sustainable wages, they're going to have to be addressed by the community colleges. There's no option, and it's a wonderful complement to the 2+1 and the 3+1. And I am incredibly grateful, by the way, that there's so much interest here among the public universities about the CCB, and that they're here to come in with an open mind to look at the data. So I think it's a compelling argument, and I'd love to see us go forward with to the next step of authorizing Illinois to allow community colleges to authorize baccalaureate, especially in advanced manufacturing, the IT field, the respiratory therapy, where the need is so overwhelmingly powerful. So thank you so much. I'd love to hear the questions here too. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. So I think we're going to go to questions, but I just do want to sort of, I think maybe speak to a little bit of what Dr. Sam talked about. And again, as I mentioned at the very beginning of this call, that our intention to move forward with something in terms of a policy document or legislation is not being done in a silo. We've obviously, as I think representative from the participants on this call, interested in hearing from the public universities, from the colleges, from the presidents, from the trustees, any and all stakeholders, as we sort of begin to develop what that looks like in terms of not only a purpose statement, but sort of what the scope of it is. And I think some of those parameters have been talked about certainly in Deb's presentation around the Bachelor of Applied Science and Bachelor of Applied Technology, the program approval, sort of all those things. I will note that another document that we sort of put together, and I don't know if we have it on the website yet, but really looked at these other states and what the language in their legislation and statutes looks like. And you will see that some of the concerns that may be raised as we begin this conversation have been addressed by those other states and are in language in legislation that has been adopted, in states from Florida to Washington in between. Particularly Ohio is one we look to that is more like Illinois, has really sort of come at this from a manufacturing standpoint, which is why we're very pleased to have Sarah Hartwick and representatives from IMA on this. So, again, not being done in a vacuum, but certainly in a broad way that addresses the two key components, which are, of course, workforce need and also equity as well. So with that, and sort of looking at our time, certainly want to give time for questions. So I think at this point, being an hour and a half in, we'll go ahead and open up to some questions. Or if folks have comments, either way.
So a comment I'd like to make, I'd like to respond a little bit to Dr. Sam's conversation with the president of NIU. I understand that it's important for us collectively to meet the needs of the state of Illinois in terms of our higher education system and all of our partners and colleagues in that system. I just want to reiterate, these are students that we are not meeting their needs. These are students who are not going to be to continue to baccalaureate degrees. That's well documented in other states. We have more and more data. We can look at the students who are attending our public and private universities. In fact, we've done that. These students are not students who are attending our universities, and they probably won't attend. So it's hard to hear that we won't consider meeting the needs of these students, because frankly, it's not about not letting the community colleges do this. It's about not meeting the needs of a group of students who we need to be able to fulfill the needs of their communities and their regional economies. That's what we're saying no to. And like Dr. Salgado, why are we doing that? I don't understand why we will close the door. It's additive. It's another pathway. It's not denying, let's do 3+1s. Let's create these pathways. Let's get out of this view that we have a system that's working perfectly, because it's not. And I think that's what we need to face in Illinois. And the baccalaureate is a part of that. But we're not going to address our equity needs, our access needs, our outcome needs, if we don't get out of our boxes and start to look toward the future. So anyway, my little comment, but it's just, Dr. Som, thank you for sharing. And thank you for having the conversation, because we all need to have that conversation. We all need to be talking about what it's going to take to change our system. And I hope we'll do that.
Yeah. Right. I'm looking at the chat, and there are a couple questions. I don't know if this one can be answered all now, or if this is one we'll have to sort of get back. But the question was asked, how many community college baccalaureate degrees are offered in those states per the number of community colleges? And then do the four-year institutions in those states also offer associate degrees? And then the next part of that is, what is the level of state funding for higher education in those states that offer CCB?
Yeah, I saw those questions. They're very, we do have the data. States vary a lot. Some states, four-year institution, give associate degrees. We don't do that much in Illinois. We very much distinguish institution. Other states don't make those distinctions the way we are. There are about 200 programs in the state of Florida with 28 community colleges. That is the densest and most scaled up state in the country. In other states, there aren't as many programs, but there might not be as many community colleges. We can calculate those statistics for you, and we'd be happy to do that. But I can't do it off the top of my head right now.
Right. We did have another question. Has the offering of CCB degrees had an impact on the ability to keep high school students in state for higher education? Interesting.
Well, I just say that is not the target audience, largely for these degrees. We are talking about adult working learners, because we know most of our students who are in dual enrollment or dual credit programs, or students who are directly out of high school, are either choosing community colleges to begin, or they're going to our universities. And those are not really the students we're talking about here. So largely, I haven't seen that analyzed, because that's not really what's going on in states that confer the degrees. They're not really focused on that high school matriculant, because we know those students are going. There is some documentation of slightly increased enrollments in institutions that do adopt bachelor's degree, but they're not large. So this is not about, huge numbers of enrollments. These programs tend to be very targeted and relatively small, because they're meeting a regional need.
I could maybe add a little bit. This is not exactly the same question, but if the question is more about what happens to students after they complete, there is a little bit of information on that that's available to us as researchers. We haven't incorporated that into any of our briefings, but we are able to look at, if you find people that, have a degree in X or in a particular occupation, and you say, well, where did you go to school? And then that allows you to, LICAS can find those people out there in their social media posts, LinkedIn or what have you, and kind of get a sense of, did they leave the state where they went to school, or are they still in the state where they went to school? And there is some evidence there that supports what we would kind of imagine would be the case from a common sense perspective, which is that community college students are more likely to stay than leave, which kind of fits in with the importance of having options available for students that are more tied to their communities and want to stay. We heard this in prior work that I've done in talent pipelines, where employers have the problem of recruiting people in particular occupations, because when they go away to go to university, then they don't come back. And so then till sometime later, and then they have this trouble of trying to retain them in the occupations and with the employer. So they see the advantage of giving them options that allow them to remain in the community. And I think the data backs that up.
Jim, I'd like to jump in with one thing, if you don't mind. I think, having been on the advisory, the one thing that you and others always reminded us of, with both, by the way, IBHE and ICCB at the table, is that our governing bodies, right, in IBHE and ICCB would oversee this. They would control it at the end of the day, for good reason, right? Control the ultimate outcome, control the quality, but they would also have more tools, right? So to the additive point, right, and more tools to deal with, the diversity of career paths, diversity of geographies, diversity of students, right? They just have more tools. And the second thing that was striking to me is just over time, the elegance of legislation that has emerged in other states, that, you made mention of it, Jim, that address some of these, concerns that people might have, right? And that in some cases give our four-year partners an opportunity to, put a viable plan in front, to be a part of the solution, and then give the accrediting bodies, ICCB and IBHE, the ability to say, oh my gosh, we now have, two good additive options. We're going to go with two, or we shouldn't go with the four-year one, or, we like the two-year one better in this instance, right? So, that seems to me like when, you're given a little bit more choice from an accrediting body standpoint, more tools to serve your community and to serve your region's economy and your state's economy, you would, want that, additive tool. And so I think, it's really important. The last thing I'd like to say is, this ends up being about all of us working to create solutions, right? That meet a broader set of people. So I think it activates us in higher education, in a way that is additive, and the beneficiaries of that will be our employers and our students, right? So if there's a little back and forth, it's quite healthy and really quite good for the ultimate people that need to benefit, and those are our students and our employers.
Thank you for that, Chancellor. Any other questions, comments, reflections before we give you back a little bit of time?
I'd like to offer just a few, having been in this space in Florida and having to lead the shared development of bachelor programs. I think about our higher education system and the lens that we should be using in terms of the economic development for the state and using all of its assets. And so our strategic plan talks about, a thriving Illinois. And one of the main goals is centered on equity. And I really appreciate the data that you gathered. And I think about, our top research institutions in our state, and they use evidence to inform decisions. Yet here is some compelling evidence that they're not wanting to embrace, is what I'm hearing. And so in Florida, all 28 community colleges are authorized to confer bachelor programs, bachelor degrees. But the statute, as you mentioned, Jim, as well as Chancellor Salgado, really talks about the regional approach, the conversations that should take place, the data collection to demonstrate this is not looking to become a university. This is really about there's a local regional workforce need that we're trying to address. And here's how we're going to go about it, not be duplicative, but really addressing the gaps and really strengthening our ability to meet the needs. And so I would hope we could engage in a meaningful discussion around some of the research that you've already shared here today on how we can collectively address this. And as Juan just said, right, we're looking at all solutions here, approaching this from different angles. Not many adult learners have the option of picking up and moving to another location across the state to access the bachelor degree. So I truly hope and that we can have some fruitful conversations using the evidence and embracing the concept that this is in select areas where there's high demand, that we're not meeting the needs, and we can work together to solve the challenge.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Proctor. I see we got a question here that sort of made a statement and also a question that community colleges are cheaper than public universities, at least in part, because they're funded by local tax revenues in addition to state and tuition revenues. Should this be considered when setting tuition rates for these CCBs? I'll just comment the fact that I know that in Arizona, they had made some provisions in their legislation that talked about the tuition not being more than 150%. I don't know specifically others, maybe Deb or Tim could address that question.
Well, that's exactly right, Jim. Some states say that tuition can't be any higher than the lower division tuition. So states set tuition rates in different ways, and sometimes that's even set by local boards. I'd be curious, though, Sophia, I don't know if you can come online. I'm curious about what do you mean, should this be considered?
Hi,
It's definitely
thank you,
considered,
Deb, and hi,
but
Jim.
I'm not quite sure what
No,
you're
I
getting
was
at
really,
here.
my question was,
That might help.
is it being considered? How will that, in terms of
Sophia.
equity and funding of our public higher education institutions, is that something that would be considered in setting these rates? That's what I was trying to ask.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, states fund the programs in different ways. So, and some reimburse at the same rate that they would reimburse similar courses already. So
Thank you.
it does certainly take into account the different funding models across these states. And again, we could definitely have a longer conversation about that. You're welcome.
Sure. All right, any others? All right, well, I'm seeing none, as they say. Deb or Tim, any kind of closing remarks before we let folks go?
Just thank you, Jim.
Okay.
Yeah,
Tim?
appreciate it. Yeah, very much so.
Well, again, I want to thank all of you for being on. It was great to see that the number we started with is about the same number that stayed on. So just glad that we were able to hold folks' interest. And again, this is the beginning of a conversation. We're looking forward to continuing to grow our advisory committee, but also continue this conversation as we move through this year and certainly into the spring. So thank you very much. And we will make sure that we get copies of the recording to you as well as the PowerPoint. So have a happy holidays, everyone, and take care.